Yeah, it's a Sunday evening at 7:50. As I look at my computer clock, March 26th. You have a nice weekend. Only 4 days since our last one, Karen.
I know. Exciting times.
Exciting times. A lot of things going on. We got a lot to get to, and we're gonna start right up. Where did you want to start? Because I'm gonna, as always, we'll go to your first topic. We do often do old news, but I think we kind of exhausted the immigration and the minimum wage topics last week. So is there something new that you really want to focus on to start today's broadcast, Karen?
Yeah, actually, I wanted to talk about something that has been trending lately on social media. And I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's this whole post about these 14 girls, young ladies who have been missing in DC. And so there was a post that happened to appear on social media that a lot of celebrities were also sharing. And it said that 14 girls, teenage girls, were missing from the DC area and that there was no media coverage. And so people were retweeting it. People were using the hashtag Find Our Girls DC and, trying to raise awareness on this issue. And so I, was really taken aback by this news. And I was really also distraught that there wasn't a lot of media attention for this issue. And then the more that I researched into it, the more that I found that there were some discrepancies. And so I did want to talk about this because I think in the time of social media that we're in right now, it's so important for us to shed light on these issues and the good things that happen when you're sharing social media, like trending topics, but also how you can be sharing information that's not 100% accurate and kind of how can we balance the two? And so this was trending, and the reason why it was trending was because in DC, the DC Police Department has started doing this new initiative, and I think it just started as of this month, so a couple months ago, this year I should say. And basically what they're doing is they're putting profiles of all of their missing people, but it's only the people who are missing ages 15 and under, and also if anyone is missing ages 65 and above. And these are the people who they consider to be, the most critical cases. And so they're posting profiles on their Twitter feed so that people who might be in the streets, who might see them, can also call them immediately and kind of end the case. And so within the past couple of weeks, they've been posting a bunch of profiles of young girls, mostly Black and Latina, teenage girls who have been missing. And so a lot of people misinterpreted that to think that it was all of these girls missing within a 24-hour frame, when in reality it's been a couple months. In some instances, it's been a year or so. And so, a lot of people were taken aback and they're like, why are we hearing about this in our media sources? Why aren't there any major channels posting or talking about this? And then it turned out that these cases were older, that some girls were found. And so I think it's really important that we talk about this, because I think that sometimes we see things on Twitter or we see things on Instagram or Facebook and we're just so adamant to retweet. And I think a lot of it, there's been articles that talk about how millennials in particular are doing this, and they're not reading the news all the way, and they're not, they're not being informed as they should be. And so they're really quick to retweet, which is great, because actually as a result of that, there's been a new kind of coalition that's been formed. Muriel Browser has been on the prowl, and she's been really advocating that they find these girls, which is great. And a lot of celebrities, like I said earlier, have been posting it. And that barely ever happens when it comes to local news, which is great. But at the same time, all of this isn't true. And so I think, I don't know, what are your thoughts on that? I don't know if you've seen
first of all, I was not even aware of this story at all. And I think that's a huge problem in that we are so factionalized. So you're reading your Twitter account and your Facebook page, and you're getting the stories that are of great interest to your friends and your, Facebook friends and Twitter followers, but they're probably going to be a lot like you. And when I say you, I mean, in general, people, all of us. So my Twitter page, my Twitter followers, and the people I follow, my Facebook friends, I have a very wide assortment because of my history in media and radio and all, but still, I would say the preponderance, Karen, are, men in my age group. So we're going to be probably telling each other the same stories that grab our attention. Right. And that is what you see in every, with all of us. And that's unfortunate, because then we don't know what other people are talking about. We're not as aware of each other's worlds. And so I think this is really a very fascinating story. And you brought it to my attention, Find Our Girls DC, and the sense immediately that people have, oh my gosh, people aren't talking about all these missing African American young ladies, girls, Latina girls, young ladies. It's racism, it's privilege, and that could be the case. And it's not as though there aren't many examples where the lives of people who aren't, from the dominant paradigm are less valued. But in this case, it's really not accurate. I mean, it's accurate that there are these missing girls, but some, as you said, were found. And the numbers, I mean, I went to heavy.com as you were speaking, and that's not always my go-to site either, but they have the 5 fast facts thing. And what they said here, and I'm going to believe this is true, is yes, there are now about 12, more than a dozen Washington DC's TC teens are missing. Yeah. And, if you know the district, it's mostly, or now it's about 50% African-American and 50% African-American. And then the balance would be white, Asian, Latino. And I don't know in which order that is, but maybe it's 20, 25%, and then 20, and then, whatever. It doesn't really matter. So if you're going to have more missing kids, probably the majority will be African-American and Latina, given the demographics of the city.
Right. And
what Heavy is saying is, hey, this is true. These girls, and there's some boys too, are missing, but this is steady. This is it's not different. It's not like suddenly there's an upsurge. There isn't some pedophile or serial killer or kidnapper out there necessarily. Some kids do run away. Some kids are in gangs, and you just don't, I mean, awful things happen, but it's not suddenly this new thing that the police are keeping their foot on and nobody gets to know about. I think it's important we talk about this. Like you said, we can't always know. Even what we read from our friends may or may not be accurate.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that, as I was doing more research on this issue, because it is, like you said, predominantly minority girls that have been found missing, one of the things that I wanted to know was why people were so, angry. And I think this is really justified also. And something that we should talk about, especially with progressives and liberals, is this idea that, people assume that because they're African American or Latina, that they are just runaways. And so they don't consider something, they don't consider it being like such a huge deal that they're missing. Whereas if these young ladies were white or another color, I think it would be more alarming in some sense because they would attribute it to some other reason immediately. But the articles that I was reading all said that because these girls are Latina and African American, that the main reason why they were kind of dismissed or wasn't as alarming was because they do tend to run away due to problems in their house, due to, issues going on in their communities. And so I think that's also something that we do need to talk about is like, why is this happening? Why do young women feel so threatened being in their houses where they should be feeling safe, where they should be feeling secure? And how can we help so that this doesn't even happen in the future, especially when you're at that age where you're a huge target for so many things that could happen to you if you're in the streets and you're a teenager and you're a female, right? And so I think that's also something that we do need to talk about, and we need to kind of put our biases aside as well.
Well, I think our society just doesn't provide support for kids. I mean, I just think it's that bottom line. I don't care what what race or where their nation of origin is. We don't provide, centers, which we should. Why aren't there neighborhood centers in every neighborhood where there are security, where there's police, where there's social workers, where there's, therapists, so kids can talk if they need, maybe there's violence in the home, they don't want to go home. Right. So they can talk to somebody and they can go to this neighborhood center. And we just don't have that. Why? Kids can play ping pong, they can play basketball, and there's some of that, but there just isn't enough. That should be, I think, every kid, really every adult, everybody should live within, walking distance, if possible, of a community center where they can feel safe. Why not have a library in there, a little book room? This seems to me just a kind of the minimum that we should expect in a civilized country, a civilized society. I think in Europe, they have much more of this. I mean, I visited Europe a couple times. There's more sense of community, the neighborhoods, people have places to go, parks. We don't have that. And it's terrible for everyone. But if you're poor, if your family is living in a smaller apartment or house and there's more crowding and there's more anger as a result, there's financial stress, there's going to be people are going to want to leave. And again, it doesn't matter white, black, Latina, Asian, same deal.
Yeah.
If you're from in an affluent house, you got lots of room. Everyone goes to their own room, watches TV, maybe depressing, but you're probably not going to find people running in the streets to the same degree because they have an alternative, which is not as bad. So yeah, it all comes. We talk about this all the time, Karen. I want your feedback on this. It's the money thing. It's that a few people have so much and so many have just not enough, and there's not enough support for them.
Right. I definitely agree with you. But I think what this showed me is that regardless, right, this whole story we learned isn't completely factual. Yes, there are girls that are missing, but I think what I learned, and I think it's powerful, is that when people come together for a cause and they start spreading the news and they start getting together and they start sharing this knowledge with their friends, with other people who might not have access to this information so easily, that change can happen. And so now we're seeing local representatives making action. I think even some lawmakers also put it to the attention of our sessions. And so like things are happening, which is great, even though this story isn't 100% factual, but it just shows that people power is important and it can go very far. And so I think we should never limit, we should never limit ourselves to what we can achieve if we all unite and come together for a common cause. So I think this is an example of that.
No, and I was thinking of that statement we had from the first show, the people united. Remember, I couldn't go, but now I remember we'll never be divided, right? So if we're together and we're demanding, something for our kids that all our kids deserve, then we're much more likely to get it. You're listening to the Progressive Maryland Videocast, by the way, on March 26th. Karen Guzman, co-host, you're watching her, I think, right now. At least that's what I see on screen. Usually it switches back and forth, but the software's so weird. Sometimes if one of us is talking, it switches to that individual speaking. Now it doesn't seem to want to do that. Whatever. Who really cares? We do this. Well, no, I mean, we should both get to see, we should see both of our faces, but you do get to do that. And we do this pretty much every week. And, according to our schedule, about a half hour talking about progressive issues for Progressive Maryland. The website, progressivemaryland.org. And we do post the videos there in the video cast section. There's an audio video page, and if you click on that, then you see videos, and you click on videos and you'll find us. We're also at the YouTube channel, the Progressive Maryland YouTube channel. So those are a couple of different options for you if you want to watch this video and you want to listen to it. All right, so you were talking about the sense among many that the Black and Latina girls, when they disappear or if they run away, it's not considered as important. It's not as serious a problem. It's more likely than if it's white girls. And I don't doubt that there's truth to that. There may also be, as you said, reasons in that it's more likely because of the stresses that that people of color undergo more, and plenty of white people undergo stresses too, but that the disproportionate amount of stress might cause more to run away. And so to that degree, I mean, it's plausible. It makes sense. But I think there's another factor and why there's such distrust of the media, that the media isn't covering this. The media, the people who write articles, the people who report on TV, they're elite. They went to top schools. They come from affluent backgrounds. There definitely has been a significant effort in the newspaper world. I mean, I've seen this in the television world to recruit from all different groups of people, all races, to have different names, Latina names, African-American faces, Asians. I mean, you see all that. But nevertheless, if you're going to get on TV, if you're going to be writing for a newspaper, you're well-educated, you're articulate, you went to a very good school. Even if you didn't come from a wealthy background, you came from a supportive one. Right. Where people were reading to you, taking care. Now, they might have been struggling economically, but it's not the same world that so many people inhabit. And so there just isn't quite the same level of empathy when it comes to kids who grew up in really tough circumstances with families that maybe loved them just as much, but they just didn't have the opportunity, the time to spend. And I think that is a major reason that giant chunks of America don't feel they're represented, don't believe the media, and often do believe fake news. Now, this isn't fake news, but it's misleading news.
Yeah.
I think that's what we see a lot of, Karen, terribly, tragically.
Yeah, I mean, something else that I've been seeing, like, I wanted to bring up this topic for a variety of reasons. It's just that I think it's one of these intersectional topics that you're talking about, you're talking about race, right? You're talking about gender, you're talking about so many things. And I think something that I've been also reading about in terms of commentary from people about this alarming news is that a lot of people of color didn't feel like their white allies, especially women, were supportive in terms of spreading the news about this issue. And so, like, had this been 100% true, they just didn't feel like white women were supportive of this or were sharing this news. And a lot of people brought it back to the Women's March in DC, which I thought was really interesting. And the fact that in the Women's March, which, you know, I was there, and a lot of people felt like it was a predominantly white space, like a lot of white women were representative there, and not as many women of color, not as many men of color. And so a lot of people were feeling like this space that was for women's rights, but not just women's rights, right? There were a lot of issues that were talked about, were not as accepting or as inclusive for issues that affect women of color and people of color in general. And so, like, some of our comments that I was reading was, where are the white women who are marching at the Women's March? Where are they supporting this news? Where are they posting about it or talking about it in these major news sources like CNN, like ABC News, like all of this? And so I thought that was really interesting too, that a lot of people felt like they weren't supportive by people who consider themselves to be feminists from other races. And so I don't know what you think about that, or if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I think they're two different things. I mean, I would say the thing about the Women's March DC, I mean, there definitely were faces of color. I mean, there's no question about it. I saw them, but I would also agree that, I mean, I was at that march as well. And I mean, you can tell us what your thoughts were, Karen, but it was probably more women. And I would say also more, I won't say elderly women, but I would say women 40 plus. So, you know, there weren't as many millennials. There were some millennials that I saw. Maybe I didn't see, maybe I missed them. To me, that's a somewhat separate issue from the issue of whether white allies are tweeting about missing girls of color, whether this is a significant problem that's suddenly cropped up, or this is a continuing issue that may not be quite as serious as some are saying it is. I think there are two different issues. So starting with the March on Washington, or the Women's March, mm-hmm. And I say this about progressive Maryland too, to a degree. I don't know where, that's hard for me to say, well, it's this group's fault. Or, I mean, I kind of wonder, why aren't more allies of color working with white progressives? It seems to me that the issues that we focus on, whether it was at the Women's March or Progressive Maryland or in the Bernie campaign, I mean, I was so disappointed that there were, and you were for Bernie too, we didn't see that many allies of color. And I found, especially African American, and older especially, I found that so disappointing, because I felt that Bernie's issues were universal. I didn't feel like they were limited at all to whites, nor did I think the Women's March, the issues that we're talking about, reproductive rights, wage equity, mm-hmm. Protection from violence, protection from being just insulted verbally, the way Trump does. I don't see those as white women issues. So I guess I'm kind of disappointed, perplexed. I'd like to know how we can attract more allies of color, but I don't really understand why they aren't, found in the same numbers as a percentage in the population. When it comes to the issue of the Black and Latina girls, maybe that's an issue just of being aware. I mean, like I said, I wasn't even aware. I mean, the media wasn't talking about this. I think that you do hear, I'll give you a counter to that. There were, I can't breathe marches and Black Lives Matter marches in New York City. And there were, my cousin, my niece, marched, her male, her friends were marching. So they definitely were out in the streets. supporting the communities of color in Manhattan who are under attack by police. So my experience isn't necessarily that we don't see, whites allying with people of color in these issues, but in this case, maybe they weren't. But what are your thoughts, Karen?
Well, I definitely have been at a lot of marches for Black Lives Matter in DC, and I would say that, to the same degree that we were able to see this women's march in DC, the amount of people supporting, the amount of white people supporting Black Lives Matter was nowhere near the amount of people that were at the white women, at the women's march, which was, like I said, a predominantly white space. From where I was, there wasn't
what does that mean? What do you mean by a predominantly white space? What does that mean?
Meaning like there were predominantly like white women were there at a higher rate than any other, than Latina women, than Black women.
You're not saying that women of different non-white women, you're not saying they weren't.
I'm not saying they weren't
discouraged from, they weren't welcome. Are you saying they weren't welcome? Because when I hear you say it's a predominantly white space, I'm not saying this is what you're saying. This is what I'm hearing.
I'm not necessarily saying they weren't welcome, because actually a lot of people of color, and you can read articles on this, felt like they weren't welcome there. They felt like it wasn't their space. And I know for me personally, I went there, but I know I talked to a lot of my friends of color, my female millennial friends of color, to be more specific, and they didn't feel like that was a space.
Well, why not? What was it about that march, the women's march, that made them feel they weren't welcome?
It was this issue that we're just talking about right now, which is when people of color have issues like the Black Lives Matter or immigration rights, which is something that I'm heavily involved in as well. We don't see white people coming to our marches. We don't see our allies coming and supporting at all near the same amount of that we go and support their causes, right? Whether that's
but I can see I saw a lot of pro-immigrant signs at the Women's March. I saw a lot of them.
Right, but if you go to an immigration rights, something that's led by the Latino community that is for immigration rights, I have never seen more than 2 or 3 white people in any of these events.
And I'd say that's really unfortunate. I just want to say that's really unfortunate.
Yeah, it is.
But still, I don't see that's an issue that does, as you said, you described it as our issue or our march, right? That's what you called it, our march, because it's
something that's led by us, right? Like led by people of color. That's what I mean. When something is led by people of color, like the Black Lives Matter movement or the marches here have been led by Black Lives Matter groups. And when you talk about those, when you go to those events that are led by people of color, I haven't seen nearly as much support as I would have liked to see from white allies, and especially not when you're comparing it to the Women's March in DC. And so that's been my experience, and that's been the experience of a lot of my friends as well that are talking about different issues, not just even Black Lives Matter, not just immigration rights, but also like the Muslim ban, a lot of these issues that are intersectional. Because for us, like being Latina, like I'm a woman, and on top of that, I'm Latina. So I have to face, like these different issues. And I can't choose which one I want to be a part of. I'm both. And so like that's been their experience as well. And so when this issue with these African-American and Latina girls came, a lot of people felt like, well, where's the support of all these women who said they're feminists, who said that they care about women's issues, who said they care about, women being respected and women having rights? Like, where are these rights for these girls? Where's the awareness for these girls that are missing?
Well, I guess, it turned out to be an unclear example of, lack of concern on the part of white women, because we're not clear that this really was a problem anyway, or disproportionate. It's really tough. It's really tough for us to work together. I think it's so unfortunate that there are these divisions that are based on gender, that are based on race, that are based on nation of origin. I really am sorry about that, and I wish we could somehow get past them, because all of these divisions and all this finger pointing, well, why didn't you come to my march? Why didn't more Black people support Bernie? Whatever. All of that plays so perfectly for the 1%. It works in the favor of the economically privileged. It works in favor of the economic elites. As long as the 99% is divided, whether by lines of whether you're native-born American or whether you were born in another country, whether you're a cisgender or a non-normative gender, anything where we start pointing fingers and saying, you're not supporting me enough, you should be here, why don't you care more about my issues? Any of us, when we start doing that, we weaken us. We weaken ourselves. We're not united. Then we're divided, and it gives so much power to the even more power to those who are rich and powerful. So I find it incredibly disappointing. I don't really have a good answer. I mean, I will say, I really wish I did. I don't. My answer has always been, Karen, that we have to fight together for economic justice. We have to fight together for truly redistributive policies, that we, minimum, guaranteed living wage. Even if you're not working, you should still be economically secure. That, no one's too rich and powerful. Nobody's too poor. I think those are the issues. We bring good jobs back here. I mean, to me, those are the issues that can unite us. At the same time, I definitely agree that that white people need to recognize that someone like yourself, a white man, has to recognize that a Latina woman or an African American gay man, they are going to have issues that go beyond simply economic deprivation. And I think we do have to recognize that. At the same time, I'm going to throw it back and say that the African American woman has to recognize that not every white man is privileged, that there are white men who are living desperate lives themselves, that they may be worse off in many ways. I think there has to be a willingness to be empathetic and not look with envy and resentment at somebody just because they happen to be, of a different sex or gender or sexual preference or race or nation of origin. I think we just have to get past that and listen to each other's stories and be empathetic to them and show concern.
Yeah.
But you may disagree with that. I mean, I want to hear your response to that.
I mean, I would say I do agree that there might be people that are worse off, like you said, but if we look at the trends and if we look at, I'm talking about on average, a white male is going to definitely have more privilege than a poor, or than even a poor white male is going to have more privilege than a poor African American or Latina female. And that's just proven. Like, if you look at how the names, even like people's names when they apply to jobs, like there's been so much bias. There's been so many, there's been proof already that women who have certain types of names that can be considered racial, right, are at a disadvantage to get some jobs than men. And I think than white men. And so I think we need to also be cognizant of that. And then talking about unity, I do think you're right. I think we're more powerful when we come together. But I think what I would like to bring to this conversation is with progressives, right? Because that is our demographic with this podcast, this videocast, is that we also need to be aware that sometimes we do tend to focus on our own issues. And like kind of what you started off in the beginning saying, that your Facebook feed, your Twitter feed is focused on the people that are in your group, the people that are in your network, what they're hearing, what they're seeing, what they're posting about. But if we don't expand ourselves from that, if your friends are not talking about immigration reform, if your friends are not talking about issues that are affecting the Black community, like how can we learn about that if we don't have those people in our network, right? So how can we be more conscious as progressives to make sure that we're being more inclusive of all of these issues? Because at the end of the day, like you said, we're more powerful when we're united. And if we don't know this information and if we don't hear it because we're not part of these networks as heavily as others, then we're missing out on some critical information that is holding us back and tearing us back. And then we hear different sides of the story where some people feel like they're not being as supported by certain types of communities as others. And so I think we need to definitely break that by being more inclusive and by just being in tune with like everything that's happening, not just things that are affecting us personally or people in our communities, but like other people that are not so close to us.
Well, I agree with you. I mean, I think we have to be very open to the experiences that other people are having. But I think that goes for everybody. I don't think that goes just for, white people. I think that it's really important that everyone recognize that there are people who are suffering from different groups that are different than they are. People they might have thought, well, gosh, how come everything's so good for them? It's, they've got everything. How come their lives, why are they complaining? And if you listen, you might be surprised that those people really are struggling as well in a variety of different ways. So I agree with you, Karen, but I think it's just, I think terms like privilege and white privilege, especially even male privilege, I think those cause a lot of difficulties. And I think they're best to be left to the side of the road, because people who are not doing well, people who get laid off, people who were once working in a factory making a lot of money, 40, 50,000 a year, and are now working at Walmart for $9.50 an hour, they don't feel privileged. They feel like their lives stink, and they don't want to be told how somebody else's life is worse. Just like people, who are living in a rough neighborhood in a inner city, they don't want to hear about how other folks are suffering. I think there has to be a recognition that that all of us, unless we're really, economically secure, have a tough go of it. At the same time, being cognizant of the specific problems that may affect people who are different than we are. They may have it even worse in certain ways.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, I guess we're never going to solve this one. We've generally agreed on everything, but let me just real quickly then, I want to talk about something that happened yesterday at the service. I went to synagogue. I almost never go, but my mother-in-law was, and by the way, is that a MIL? I asked you because I called her MIL. I've seen that. Is that a thing? Do people refer to their mother-in-law
as MIL?
As MIL, is that just something I just made up?
I mean, I personally have never heard of it, but it could be. I don't know.
In like texting, I don't know either. She was honored because she had worked for so many years in the kitchen there and making sure everything is kosher and, meets the dietary standards. And she's retiring now at 88. So I think it's about time, at that age, and she's ready to move on. But the thing that, oh, by the way, hear a little noise back, I apologize for that. The rabbi gave a very, very nice sermon, and I truly appreciated it. He talked about how we really have to be careful not to generalize about people or stereotype people based on the actions of others in their group. And he talked about how, there's in Israel right now, there's a Jew who's been Jewish man who's been sending threats and calling in threats to synagogues and scaring the life out of people there. But Jewish people don't say, well, all Jews do that. And he also talked about the man who killed Yitzhak Rabin, who was a beloved prime minister about 20 years ago, was also Jewish. He said, hey, we don't say that, because this one Jewish man killed the prime minister, all Jews are assassins and, they're bad people. We don't do that. He said we have to be sure we don't do that with other groups either. He mentioned, we talked about this last week, the 17, 18-year-old at Rockville High, the teenagers who were alleged to have raped the 14-year-old girl. They were from Latin America, Central America. And the rabbi said, look, we cannot say just because these two teens did something really, really bad that all teens are bad, or all Central Americans are bad, or all Central American teens are bad. We can't do that. We have to recognize that this is a community with many good people and that they're struggling, and we need to support them as best we can. I thought that was a great message. He went on to say that the same goes for Muslims, that we can't, and this is, a conservative Jewish synagogue. And I thought it was a beautiful message. We've got to recognize, and he said that the synagogue is working to sponsor immigrants from Muslim countries and from Arab countries, and also working with other faith groups and interfaith alliance to help immigrants from Central America as well, Latin America as well. So I think that's exactly what you're talking about, is not judging a group based on one or two people or even five people. I think that's very, very important, that we all try not to look down on people who are in another group or make assumptions about them because we have had bad experience, or we may not have even had a bad experience with people from that group, but we've read about a bad experience, or we heard on social media about a bad experience that somebody else had. We just can't do that, or we'll continue to be fighting with each other, and we'll be divided. So, but you thought that was a nice story because I had mentioned that in an email. So you were. Oh,
I like that, and thank you so much for sharing that. And I think that goes with what we were just talking about. Is like when we do come together, and when we stop generalizing, and when we hear each other, because I think that's also really powerful, is just hearing people's stories and just being more open-minded to other experiences and not just limiting ourselves to what we think is this one person and putting them in boxes and things like that. And so I think, yeah, I think that's such a powerful and definitely timely message. So thank you for sharing that.
All right, we don't have, I think we may have gone over our time. I wasn't good about keeping a clock on us today, Karen. So, but I do want to just briefly talk about this protest that was in Montgomery County, because we are progressive Maryland. So let's talk about Maryland just a little bit more. Although we've done quite a good job of staying, I think, in the DMV today. There was a protest against the education secretary. Her name is Betsy DeVos.
Mm-hmm.
She's all for privatizing schools and taking money from the public schools and providing the vouchers to kids so they can go to religious training that takes money out of the public schools. There were about 200 people, I think, maybe gathered. And I'd say of that 200, maybe 150 or so were anti-DeVos, anti-Governor Hogan, who was also there, and carrying signs. And there was media there, news media there. How effective, or what effect do you think these types of protests have, Karen?
I mean, I think, it's funny because I have been challenged recently on that, and a lot of people have been asking me, what are the point of protests? Like, why do people do that? But I think for me, it's not like a do-all, end-all solution to everything. I think it's a great first step to raising awareness, right, and to uniting, which is what we're talking about. It's to getting people united and to show that it's not just one type of person that cares about this issue, but it's several. And so I think that is a great pro of protests. And also just the fact that we are raising awareness. We're talking about it. We're getting news coverage. And as we've talked about with this whole DC girls issue, we see that if you don't have news coverage, right, like that's also something that limits the impact that you can possibly have. And so the fact that there's news representation, I think, is huge with protests. And I think that's how your message gets amplified as well, and your issue gets amplified.
All right, well, we're going to just wrap this up, because I'll tell you what, that's a really good comment from Karen, and I agree with you. As much as I sometimes struggle with that question, after there's kind of a hangover effect, right? Because you feel great, and I'll go back to Karen right here. You feel great when you're in that with that group of like-minded people. Certainly, you feel, hey, there's lots of us, and we're all together, and you feel strong. And then afterwards, you kind of the hangover about, what good does it do? Trump's still president, Hogan's still governor, and it's nice, you used to think, but no, we're getting, the people see it. People don't feel alone. Some politicians who are maybe more inclined to be on our side are going to be stronger for us, and maybe some who are on the fence may say, hey, there's a big groundswell against these policies, these regressive policies that hurt our kids. Maybe I can buck my donors a little bit, and I'll still be able to get reelected. So I think there are real tangible benefits that we can point to that do result from these events, Karen.
Definitely.
All right, so I guess that'll do it at this point. We'll come back next week, the Progressive Maryland Videocast. Hal Ginsberg and Karen, now I'm talking and you're seeing me, Hal Ginsberg, and there she is, Karen Guzman. We'll be back. Thanks so much for participating. We'll be back next week.